Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. A couple of months ago I made a video about a particular Conan the Barbarian game from 2007.
What manner of devilry is this?
After that I did some research and to my surprise I found a lot of Conan games similar to the one I covered. So I decided to make a video where we go back to the very beginning and cover all Conan games that are described as action-adventures, RPGs or the mix of two. So sit back, grab some drinks and let me tell you about my experience with Conan the Barbarian games. Hope you enjoy.
We have time to kill before we reach those shores, Barbarian.
The very first Conan the Barbarian video game came out in 1984 and it was called Conan Volta or just simply Conan on box cover and title screen. I'm pretty sure I spent more hours trying to run this damn game than actually playing some other games on this list, and I'm not even joking. No matter what I tried, I just couldn't get it to work properly. I always had these weird artifacts on the screen. This game had almost nothing to do with Conan the Barbarian, and it was originally designed as a boomerang throwing game called Visigoths. This game had 7 different levels and there was no save file, so if you die you have to reset. Conan would easily die upon being hit once or twice, or so it seems from these gameplay clips. Even though this game was very basic, I think it seems at least a bit more fun to play than the next game we're going to talk about. Conan the Mysteries of Time came out in 1991. This was a very simple side-scroller action-adventure game for Nintendo Entertainment System. I played it a little bit on the emulator and I really don't have a lot of things to say about it. It's not a very good game in general, to be honest, and it didn't age that well. It looks a lot better than the previous game, which was to be expected because it came out 7 years after Volta. It starts off with a very bad looking level and I had some bad first impressions in general. The levels after this one start looking a lot better, but unfortunately the gameplay doesn't. You use the D-pad to move Conan around and you also use it to jump. Controlling Conan feels pretty bad. There are some light platforming segments that require somewhat precise jumps and jumping in this game is very awkward. It's not the worst control scheme that I ever experienced, but it's pretty bad in general. It takes a while to get used to, but that's the thing. I don't think most people will stick around to get to that point. You start the first level with no weapons except your fists. Enemies will start dropping some items that you can use as weapons, like a fireball or a sword. The only way to even notice that your attacks are landing on enemies is the sound effect that plays. There are almost no visual elements to indicate your melee hits except on that animation. Like I said before, I didn't play Volta, but the gameplay seemed a bit more fun to me, at least when I watched some gameplay videos. Conan The Mysteries of Time is a very basic and very forgettable game that only the most loyal fans of this IP will even bother remembering, or trying nowadays. The Mysteries of Time is not the only Conan the Barbarian game that released in 1991. Conan The Cimmerian came out in the same year for Amiga and DOS. This game is described as an action-adventure with RPG elements and it's much different compared to previous 2 games we talked about. It has a very charming artistic style that actually aged pretty well. I mean, you can see new games that have similar retro look nowadays. It begins with a very cool cutscene with Conan and his wife in the village. Conan is kissing his wife and doing some blacksmithing, then his wife starts washing his clothes. You're not even listening to me, aren't ya? You can literally count the pixels in this game and I totally lost you in this scene, bro. Focus. Anyway, Conan's village gets attacked and his wife gets killed, but somehow Conan survives. The way the gameplay works in this game is pretty interesting, especially for a 1991 game. You basically have 3 different gameplay perspectives. There is an overview map where you can choose to visit different locations, a top-down perspective for exploration, and a side-scrolling perspective when you engage in combat or talk with some NPCs in closed areas. I love all cutscenes I saw in this game, although the story itself is whatever. This also has to be the first Conan game that actually looks appropriate for this setting. Conan himself looks great, as well as all the locations you're going to visit. The city of Shadizar is one of the first locations you're going to visit and it's very impressive. You can talk with NPCs, trade, fight, enter almost all buildings and loot stuff. I definitely didn't expect such freedom of movement in this game, especially when it comes to entering buildings. It's very cool. There is even a crime system in this game, which took me by surprise. It's a little bit stupid because you can get arrested even when there are no guards around. You just get this dumb dialogue that the guards saw you loot things and you get arrested. The penalty for this is losing all your money. When you start fighting someone, the game jumps into the side-scroller perspective. The action itself is very choppy and not so smooth at all because the character sprites are moving in like 10 frames or even less. You have to press number 3 on your keyboard for Conan to prepare his sword and then use the mouse buttons to attack. It's very clumsy and not so fun. Conan also has a stat sheet like in RPGs, and your stats will increase upon leveling up. There are a lot of items to pick up and it's not that hard to notice the interactable items on the screen. Once again, that's because of this amazing looking artistic style. There is some very nice attention to detail and visual variety in the game is pretty good. So even though the combat itself is not that interesting or fun, the rest of the game is pretty good. If you're in a mood for playing some very old games, I would even recommend checking this game out when you're bored, especially if you're a Conan fan. In 2004 we got another Conan action-adventure game with RPG elements, simply named Conan. This game came out on PlayStation 2, PC, Xbox and GameCube. I tried PlayStation 2 version, which I ended up playing the most, but I also played PC and GameCube versions. The PC version runs much better and that's why I wanted to continue playing it, but all my recordings of the game are just a black screen. Something similar happens when I run the GameCube version over emulator. It's not a black screen, but it's basically a slideshow like this. I would recommend playing the PC version because it plays the best if you only want to play the game and not worry about recording. You will easily get 60 FPS on the PC version, even on a potato PC. Sadly, I had to switch to the PlayStation 2 emulator version, which doesn't run in 60 FPS. I tried running it in 60 FPS because with most PS2 games you can just stick one settings in the emulator and run it like that, but it doesn't work in Conan 2004 for whatever reason. The performance goes up and down and it has a lot of slowdown moments. But what about the game itself? Is it any good? Well, the game starts off very cool with a pretty long cutscene and a great soundtrack. When I say a long cutscene, I really mean it, it's like 13 minutes. It's actually a couple of different cutscenes put together, but the point is, you don't get to play the game for 13 minutes. Nevertheless, it's a pretty cool introduction to the game. The mysterious vulture cult burnt down Conan's home village and naturally he begins the quest for revenge against them. The game starts in the mountains where Conan picks a fight against a couple of wolves. Controlling Conan in this game felt pretty awkward at first, mostly because of the camera. The PS2 version has the best camera in my opinion because you don't have to use the second thumbstick to turn it around. While this would be a negative point in every modern game of a similar type, it's actually a plus when it comes to this game, trust me. Turning the camera manually on the PC version and GameCube felt very bad, and the controls are inverted by default. It stays like this even if you change the options in the menu. Conan can also jump, block and interact with some objects on these levels like climbing and picking up items. The combat in this game doesn't leave good first impressions. There is a simple combo system with 2 buttons. You have a couple of different combos at first, but you can unlock a lot more combo moves when you get enough experience while leveling up. I usually choose a couple of combos in games like this and stick to them religiously if they work. That's exactly what I did in this game as well, and I had little to no issues defeating enemies. I started playing on hard, but after a couple of hours I went back and started again on normal. I love playing games on the hardest difficulty, but I hate when the idea of the difficulty is just bloated health bars. I'm actually a huge fan of one universal difficulty in games. I don't like difficulty options. Anyway, blocking is pretty much essential and you can't just spam your combos all the time without getting hit, which is a good thing. What's not so good are some confusing mechanics in combat. You'll sometimes randomly get stuck into these awkward animations like when wolves grab you or your weapon attacks bounce off the enemy all of a sudden. I thought this is because of the weapon type, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You start the game with a sword, but you'll find more weapons on these maps that you can use. The thing is, you can't perform most of these combos with other weapons, although some of these other weapons have special attacks. I don't see the reason why they didn't include the same combos for all other weapons. However, these other weapons hit hard, which can be useful against some enemy types and bosses. That doesn't explain why the sword bounces off all of a sudden against some enemies. Maybe they're just blocking these attacks, I don't know, it's hard to tell. The overall feel of the combat is not so great to be honest, but it's good enough to keep you going through the game and experiment a little bit with different combos. There is a stamina system as well, and your combos actually use stamina. Not a lot of stamina, you are still able to perform a lot of combos, but eventually this bar will drain completely. You can pick up some potions along the way for stamina and health that you'll definitely need. Stamina regeneration is very slow, so you have to wait a little bit to regenerate if you don't have any potions. It's easier to just die sometimes, so you can come back with a resurrection mechanic with full HP and stamina. Speaking of which, the game has a pretty cool death mechanic or feature, if you will. When your health bar drains completely, you don't exactly die right away. You have to fight a couple of enemies, and if you kill them, you get resurrected. You can easily die in this game because your only way of avoiding damage is blocking, which doesn't always work against all enemy types. Some of their attacks will just go right through your block, and those health items are not so common. It definitely feels like this was by design, because it's almost like they want you to die as often as possible in order to justify the resurrection mechanic. You usually get to fight the same enemy type that killed you, and if you kill them, you get resurrected. What's also kinda cool about this is the arena of the fight, which changes depending on the zone that you're currently in. The bosses in this game only have 1 or 2 different mechanics to worry about, and like most boss fights in action-adventure games from early 2000s, they are usually just gimmicks. I'm not saying they are bad, but they are not very exciting in general. Overall, I would describe this game as very mediocre, but it was a step in the right direction for Conan the Barbarian games. The next game we're going to talk about will take the same concept for the gameplay, but it will improve it as much as possible. Conan from 2007 is a game that I already covered on the channel not so long ago. Before I show you what I had to say in that video, I have to address one thing. A thing that more than 100 people said in the comments of that video. Holy shit. I made a mistake when I said that Conan from 2007 is a movie-based game, but it was actually not. And I shit you not, out of these 300 plus comments, I think there are at least 50 plus comments addressing this mistake. So, if I see another one of these comments in this video, I'm going to punch you in the face.
I'll do as I please, woman.
Anyway, here's what I had to say about Conan from 2007. Hot naked girls.
Why not stay a while?
Huge muscular main character, almost as big as your boy. Brutal combat where you can cut off limbs in various ways. Pull out the guts of your enemies. Enter the mouth of a big monster only to come out straight off its guy, and so on. Conan was certainly one of the most brutal action adventures that you could play back in the day, and it's mostly forgotten nowadays, sadly.
You dare speak to me this way?
It's just not as good as God of War. That was one of the main critiques for the game, from the critics at least.
Then to hell with you.
Although it seems like critics and the user agreed on the average game score for Conan, which is quite rare nowadays. Conan was a very pleasant surprise for me. Conan is a hack-and-slash action-adventure released in 2007 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 by Nihilistic Software. I played this game with emulator, which is not perfect because it had some annoying visual glitches. If you can ignore that, you can make the game run in 60 FPS and high resolutions, and that was never possible on PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360, obviously. But my dumb ass forgot to tweak this little setting and make the game run in 60 FPS all the way until the very end of the game. Yeah, I wasn't that bothered with 30 FPS while I was playing, but when I tweaked that setting, I wanted to replay the whole game because it feels so much better. If you're going to play this game with emulation, just make sure to tick this setting to 120. Putting that aside, Conan offers a very satisfying action-adventure campaign with a brutal combat system and a very simple story. The whole main story revolves around Conan trying to recover his armor set piece by piece, which is done by visiting different locations and killing different bosses. You need to stop Black Death, which Conan released in the beginning of the game. There are only a handful of actual characters that have something to say, like Akana, who joins Conan early on and also helps him a little bit in later levels. She also helps him in other ways as well, you know.
We have time to kill before we reach those shores, Barbarian.
Speaking of which, there are many naked women that needs to be rescued, and their mood switches real quick when you do it.
Take me and crush me with your love.
There is not really much to say about this story besides that, but you're going to have a lot of cutscenes where Conan interacts with Akana and bosses, which brings us to the visuals. The graphics in Conan have not aged very well, but it still has some very cool effects. The bosses and enemies in general still look very cool, as well as the visual effects for dismembering NPCs. The character models on the other hand have a bit more realistic style, which never ages that well. Conan has some similarities with Arnold from the movie, but not a lot to be honest.
Then the hell with you.
I'm not sure if that's because of the movie copyright or whatever, but I would definitely prefer if Conan looked a bit more like Arnold's. He is voiced by Ron Perlman, a great actor that you probably watched in movies like Hellboy, Blade 2 and many other movies and TV shows. I think he did a decent job with voicing Conan in this game.
I'll help you. But only because it's my bloody armor. I'll not have some wizard using it as his own.
On the other side, the voice actress for Akana was not very good to be honest. She had a very mediocre performance.
The Black Death has infected these shores. Every man here is doomed. If you want to live, you'll come with me.
Come with me if you want to live.
Claudia Black is a very talented voice actress that had many great roles in other games like Uncharted, Dragon Age, etc., but this was certainly one of her worst performances. However, the narrator for the game did a very good job in general.
What manner of devilry is this?
The monster had been wearing Conan's own gauntlet, the one lost to him in Balmoria. Now it had returned, and it had a tale to tell.
There is a very good amount of visual variety when it comes to different levels. It keeps the game looking fresh from the beginning to the very end. Now let's talk about the actual gameplay. Conan has a very good hack and slash action combat where you can learn various combos with different weapon types. It's obvious that the most development effort went into making this combat system look and feel very brutal, as it should, because we're talking about freaking Conan the Barbarian. Controlling Conan is very snappy and responsive. You have light and heavy attacks with all weapon types, and your right thumbstick is used to dodge in 4 different directions. A move that you're going to use quite a bit to avoid attacks, or even prepare your next combo a bit faster. You see, at the end of each combo there is a quite long animation lock which can get you hit easily. But you can dodge right away and break that animation lock, which also allows you to start another combo straight away. There's a nice little tip for you if you decide to try this game out. Another combat move that you get by default is the ability to parry attacks if your timing for block is on point. This enables you to execute enemies with very creative and silly animations depending on the weapon type. You can learn more ways to execute enemies within the combo system. Speaking of which, you start off with some simple button mashing combos which can be equally effective, if not even better than some specific longer combos that you can learn. However, the combos are certainly worth learning and using in combat because they can deal some very good damage. Even shorter combos that send smaller enemies flying or stunned are worth using, which becomes very useful in mid and late game. The way you learn these combos is by spending experience points. You get these red points by killing enemies, opening chests and rescuing naked ladies. There is an impressive amount of different combos to learn for all weapon types in the game. It's kinda crazy. You can play with one-handed sword, sword and board, dual wield or two-handed weapons. All of these fighting styles have unique combos to learn with unique animations and cool effects. You can cut enemies in half with two-handed weapons, cut off heads with stronger combos for dual wield, or just dismember NPCs through regular combat moves. Even the ragdolls are pretty good, and some combos allow you to throw enemies around and impale them on things. Most games from this time period would make such actions a bit more scripted, but it seems like Conan mostly uses actual ragdoll physics. It's very satisfying. We could have a whole segment about many different ways to cut enemies in half. It really makes the combat so much better and more impactful. At first, I thought that Conan is going to be a very mindless hack and slash game, where combos are not even worth using. Granted, you can still try to button mash, and if you unlock the finishers for button mash combos, that can be all you need in a lot of situations. But like I said before, when you successfully perform some longer combos, they deal very high amounts of damage, or even execute smaller enemies instantly. I found some longer combos useful even in boss fights, but your timing has to be pretty good, otherwise you're going to get interrupted. I was playing the game on hard, and I think this difficulty is well balanced for the most part. The AI can be brain dead sometimes, but when they work as intended, they can easily kill you if you're not careful. A lot of NPCs in crowded fights just stand there like morons, but I don't think the game lacks difficulty in general. I had more than a couple of difficulty spikes on specific levels, but it's not exactly an extremely hard game in general, even on hard difficulty. That being said, I think there is a very decent amount of different enemy types, even though it doesn't seem like that at first. Most regular NPCs start using almost the same combos that you have, and elite NPCs have unique powers that can do some serious damage to you. Some elite enemies like these gorillas have annoying attacks that can stun lock you, so you have to be careful. Same goes for some special attacks from regular enemies, but you can't really complain about this because you have so many different ways of dealing with enemies. In other words, everything goes well until it doesn't, so you have to reset, move back a little bit and start performing your combos. That's probably the simplest way of describing the combat mechanics in Conan.
My blade thirsts!
My problem with many similar games that are heavy on the combo system is how the combos are usually not necessary and pointless. That's because you can beat a lot of these games by relentlessly button mashing the same combination, so learning new combos is not very compelling. Even though a lot of combat scenarios in combat can be resolved in a similar manner, it's still very fun to learn combos because they deal some massive damage. And more importantly, it's not that annoying to try and execute these combos. I focused a lot on dual wielding playstyle because it has some really fun moves, but now I wish I invested more points into two-handed weapons. You need to collect a lot of experience points to unlock some of these powerful combos. You also need to unlock some simple combos before you get to the stronger ones. Only at the end, I unlocked some great combos for two-handed weapons which deal massive damage. Two-handed weapons are very slow, so it can be easy to lose your composure and get hit or even killed. You can pick up all weapons from enemies, throw them for some minor damage, and Conan will always put his default sword on his back when you pick up something else. You always start the level with the default swords, but as soon as you kill at least one enemy, you can pick up their weapon. I didn't even mention how you can use the environment to your advantage, except the ragdoll physics parts. There are many different objects you can pick up and throw at enemies, use the fire to burn them, and so on. Some levels can be beaten by just throwing everything you can find on the map without thinking too much. It's fun to throw things around in this game because everything breaks in a satisfying way. On top of the combo system, you have some special powers to unlock, which use the blue resource that you can collect by killing enemies and smashing some objects. Every new power that you unlock requires more mana to be used, and they are very powerful in general. The strongest ability can wipe out all enemies on the screen in a couple of seconds, but even the weakest ability is very useful. I was being a huge dumbass by ignoring these little signs you can find on the grounds. You have red and blue signs and a certain amount of time to find a couple of more signs after you activated the previous one. I totally forgot that this is what increases your health and mana, so I beat the whole game with a huge handicap basically. You can see that my health is very low, although I did get a couple of the blue ones for mana later in the game. Like the majority of action games from this time period, Conan has a lot of quick time events. But this is a rare occasion where QTEs are done very well, and I would even say they enhance the gameplay in some situations. They are not extremely frustrating and punishing like in some other games, but you still need to pay attention when they pop up. Activities like opening doors, pulling and pushing things around have these little QTE segments with unique animations. I can't believe that I'm actually talking positive about QTEs, but there you go.
I'll do as I please, woman.
What's interesting about some levels, you can even skip a lot of enemies, as long as you successfully push or pull something to progress forward. Conan also has some light platforming segments where you need to jump to some platforms and avoid getting hit by something. These are usually very basic, and the platforming definitely feels kinda janky, but it's serviceable. I think Nihilistic did a good job with a variety of these platforming segments, as well as the very light puzzle solving on some levels. You'll get to fire big ballistas, burn things, sink ships, and do some more crazy QTEs in boss fights. Yeah, about those, I think the boss fights are pretty decent overall, especially with the presentation. Sure, it's not God of War, but the presentation is still very good in general. Even the fights themselves are not just gimmicky QTEs. I mean, each and every boss has a QTE segment, but they also have regular boss mechanics as well. You'll need to do some regular damage with your combos in order to kill them, and all of them have at least a couple of different phases. What's not so good about these phases is that some of them are just the exact copy of the first phase, but you only need to do another QTE event from the other side of the map, which would be perfectly fine if the boss doesn't constantly heal itself to the max every time this happens. It feels very cheap, but some bosses are better than others. I was very surprised to find out that even the default autosave feature in the game will save on different boss stages if you die. But I will still make regular save states in the emulator just in case. A couple of boss fights are pretty long because they have up to 3 different phases, although some of them are very underwhelming. I did die more than a couple of times on every boss fight, but once you figure out what to do, they become pretty easy. Like I said before, the presentation makes these fights even better than they actually are. Although even just in general, the boss fights in Conan are quite solid, considering this is an action-adventure game from 2007, where many studios were struggling with QTEs and making these games as cinematic as possible, at the cost of diminishing the actual combat mechanics in some cases. The dragon boss fight is kinda crazy with the presentation and different phases it has, even though it's a bit annoying. As for some random cool mechanics, when you get hit by arrows, you have to pull them out, so your pull-out game has to be strong. We have to mention the music as well, which is very good, and it gives the game a great atmosphere.
My blade thirsts.
Overall, I would definitely consider Conan as a hidden gem from 2007, which deserves a remaster or remake.
You're a brave man.
That's probably never going to happen because Nihilistic closed down long time ago, but I'm pretty sure THQ Nordic owns this IP now. If done properly, I think this remake would do very good today. I would heavily recommend trying this game out today, whether through emulation or on Xbox, or if you have a PlayStation 3 lying around somewhere. Only a year after this game, we got to see a big MMORPG in the Conan universe. Age of Conan came out in 2008 and it was an MMORPG. Nowadays it's called Age of Conan Unchained and it's a free-to-play MMO. You have to download the launcher from their website, which is painfully slow when downloading the files for the game for some reason. I heard about this game before, but I never played it. I was too busy playing World of Warcraft back in the day and some other MMORPGs. Seriously, I played World of Warcraft a lot, but I also experimented a little bit with some other MMOs back in the day like Rift, Runes of Magic, Neverwinter and so on. I stopped playing MMOs because they just require you to commit your life to them, which I can't afford nowadays. I love single-player games at least a bit more than MMOs. That being said, I was very interested in trying out this game, but I didn't expect anything crazy. Well, it turned out to be a much better game than I expected, and some of its features really surprised me. Like the fact that all dialogue is fully voice acted, which is unheard of for such an old MMORPG.
Brave words from one who has worn a slave's chains. The shame of servitude finally overcame your cowardice, did it?
It's not an amazing voice acting, but still, most MMOs only had a couple of voice lines for NPCs. A lot of time has passed until WoW and some other MMOs like Elder Scrolls Online introduced fully voice acted lines in dialogue. Age of Conan lets you choose a class and a race in the beginning with some pretty outdated character customization options. Some of the class options are locked, and I assume you have to buy the expansions to unlock them, and that's totally fine for a free-to-play MMO. The game doesn't seem to be paid to win, but I might be wrong, I don't know. Anyway, Age of Conan leaves some very good first impressions. I mean, I didn't expect a lot from this game, like I said before, so maybe that's why I got pleasantly surprised in the beginning. Controlling your character feels very snappy in this game, as it should. In true Conan's fashion, you need to save a hot lady that's been captured. Learning about basic mechanics and how the game works in this section of the game was pretty fun and engaging. Speaking of engaging, the combat has something I never seen in other MMORPGs. Age of Conan has a tab targeting combat system like 99% of older MMOs. You use the tab button to select the enemy and you get different spells and abilities to use on your hotbar. I created a Cimmerian soldier and selected the Conqueror class. But what's pretty unique when it comes to combat in Conan is those arrows you see on enemies. Those arrows indicate which side of the enemy is more protected, so you want to aim at the side with less or no indicators in order to deal the most damage. To complement this melee combat system, you get 3 different directional melee attacks. You need to use an appropriate directional attack to hit the unprotected sides. It's a simple combat system, but it makes all combat encounters a lot more engaging than some other tab targeting MMOs. I didn't have to wait a lot to get different abilities for my class. Some of these abilities can combo with those directional attacks, which will make you deal more damage or trigger some unique spell effects. The combat feels a bit static for my personal taste, and I have no idea how it feels at much higher levels. I also have no idea how many people play this game nowadays, but I did see more than a couple of players in the starting zone. What's interesting about doing the main quest is the ability to choose whether you want to do it solo or in the group. I mean, that sounds like any other MMORPG, but Age of Conan puts you in a different instance for some solo quests. You will need to switch to the single player mode from time to time and do some particular quests, which is done by talking to the innkeeper. Then the game switches to the night time when you do this, and it's basically an instant stereo of the same map, where you won't get to see other players. Even though I appreciate this mode, I don't think the main quest is interesting enough to continue playing the game just for the story. I mean, it would not be fair to judge the game like that. You're not going to play an MMORPG just for the story anyway. I did have some fun with exploring a couple of these zones and testing out my new abilities. The thing is, I really don't want to invest a lot of my time in MMOs nowadays, so I don't see myself playing this game a lot more than I already did. Well, actually, I want to try out ESO and make a video about that game soon, but that's a topic for another video. For what it's worth, Age of Conan is a much better MMO than I expected, and I had some fun while testing it out for this video. If I discovered this game back in the day when I took a break from WoW, I will probably play it a lot. I have no clue how good is the community and how many people are playing the game nowadays, or how's the raiding scene or PvP. But if you love MMOs, you could give it a go, especially because it's free to play, so there is no barrier to entry.
A friendly face amongst so much ugliness.
Conan Exiles is a survival game that came out in 2018 on PC and consoles. I was always interested in trying out this game, simply because it looks like something I will probably enjoy. These kinds of survival games should be right up my alley. They usually have a great progression system that's heavily connected with survival elements, of course. Features like material gathering, building things and exploring the open world map is something that I really enjoy in RPGs, and survival games are not that different when it comes to this. And of course the multiplayer mode is a huge aspect of these games, but I personally have little to no interest in that. The last, somewhat similar game that I played was V Rising, and the one before that was Valheim. I enjoyed both of those games, and I can say the same about Conan Exiles, but I quickly got bored. Much faster than I expected, because I could see myself playing through the whole quote-unquote campaign of the game. And I might still do that in the future. I understand that a lot of people play these games for the multiplayer mode alone, which is great. I wanted to see if it's worth playing in the single player mode, and if you truly love survival elements and crafting, it definitely is. There is a lot of things I like about this game. The survival elements like eating and drinking are not as annoying as I thought they would be, they don't get in the way that much. All gathering mechanics are pretty fun because they have nice attention to detail when you interact with objects. Like rocks breaking in multiple pieces when you mine them, grass moving in a satisfying way when you pick it up, and building mechanics are pretty straightforward. I love building my own little base in these games and going out in the world and explore. However, the open world in Conan Exiles is not that interesting, not so far at least. I don't think this game looks very good in general, not even for a 2017 release. Graphics are not everything of course, but this artistic style is a little bit bland or generic. That's a shame because they could go crazy with the Conan setting and make it much darker and more interesting in general. I think previous games we covered did a much better job with the fantasy of the Conan universe, even the MMO was better on these fields. Then we have the combat, which is much better than I expected. I mean, I don't expect to find an amazing action combat system in survival games, so Conan Exiles surprised me a little bit. I used the two-handed sword of course, and you have a couple of different attacks, a dodge and a block. There is also a stamina system that you have to worry about, and when it depletes, you can be in a big trouble. However, stamina management is not crazy in this game, and you can easily manipulate enemy AI until your stamina starts regenerating again. Speaking of manipulating enemy AI, they can be very stupid sometimes, and using the terrain to your advantage is very easy. Overall, I did enjoy the melee combat for what it is. The range gameplay is also quite decent, but I hate the fact that arrows use stamina as well. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, especially in a survival game, but it just doesn't feel good. You could probably manipulate the AI even easier if the bow didn't use any stamina, so I can definitely see why they decided to do this. There is an RPG-ish progression system, I guess, where you get to invest your leveling up points. These stats will give you different bonuses to certain weapon types, and they make you stronger in general. But since this is a survival game, getting new armor and weapons seem way more important. People are kinda crazy about survival games nowadays, and I think Conan Exiles came out in the perfect time when this genre started breaking into mainstream. This game still has a very healthy player base on Steam, and it's also on consoles. I have to be honest though, I think it's a little bit overrated. But again, I'm just judging it by playing the single player mode. I have no idea about the online play, so I won't even try to comment on it. If I was in a mood for a similar game, I would rather go back to V-Rising because it feels like a much better game in general, or I would try something like Enshrouded. However, if I was in a mood to play an online survival game with some friends, I would give Conan Exiles another chance for sure, and maybe then I would understand why some people love it so much. Conan Chop Chop is the last game on this list. This is a roguelike action co-op that came out in 2002 on PC and consoles. It's a simple roguelike game, but a pretty decent one at that. It's a silly little game with decent action roguelike gameplay and cartoony graphics. You can choose between 4 different heroes to play with, and they all have some unique starting abilities. For example, Conan has a leap attack, Valeria has a charge, and so on. I played with these 2 characters and I had a lot of fun actually. You use the left thumbstick to move and right thumbstick to attack in all directions. You can also attack with the square button, but I found the thumbstick attacks very intuitive actually. It's almost like a twin stick shooter. There is a blocking ability that you can also use as a parry mechanic if you time your blocks. This can stun melee enemies or even reflect the projectiles. The controls are quite snappy in this game, so these mechanics work really well. The maps are randomly generated, as you would expect from a roguelike game. As a matter of fact, all features and mechanics are very similar to your typical roguelike action-adventure. You can randomly find shops on these maps where you can buy weapons, armor and health items. There is a hub area where you can do a little bit more than that, like learning some new skills for your heroes and getting new starting gear when you gather enough materials. What's also worth mentioning is the split-screen co-op mode, which can be really fun if you like playing with someone in co-op. There is really not a lot to say about this game other than that. I noticed that it has some mixed reviews on Steam, and a lot of people are bringing up bugs as the reason. I didn't find any bugs while I was playing, but then again, I didn't play the game for 60 hours like some of these people. I would recommend checking out this game when it's on sale, but it almost has nothing to do with Conan the Barbarian. It's not exactly a must-play for Conan fans, which is the whole point of this video, I guess. And that will be all Conan games I wanted to cover in this video.
Take me and crush me with your love.
My top 3 Conan games would be something like this. At number 3, I would put Age of Conan Unchained. I could see myself playing this MMO if I was going to experiment a little bit with MMOs again. If I stumbled upon this game back in the day, I would probably play it a lot. At number 2, I would put Conan from 2004. Even though I had a lot of critique for this game, I still thought it was a pretty fun action-adventure from PS2 era. It's not amazing by any means, it's actually very mediocre, but it's fun. At number 1, I would put Conan from 2007. It's without a doubt the best Conan game up to date, if you ask me. Brutal and underrated action from start to finish, highly recommended. Anyway, tell me what's your favorite Conan video game in the comments below.
Then the hell with you.
Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.